Good morning, my students and listeners. Today we have for discussion the topic alternative security scenario in the global politics. Now, when I say alternative security scenario, what I intend to make the presentation about is that the prevailing concept of security is undergoing change, and this change has become dramatic enough today to demand attention of all the learners. Popularly understood, security is usually meant sort of protection against any physical injury. So there are agencies always available, but at a broader plane, like in international politics, this was understood that the state should protect the individuals. Now, this never meant that state's protection of individual is confined to making available all those facilities and protection systems by which the individual will not be visited by physical injuries. Security in that sense would have meant only military build-ups. Though over the years, after the nation state was created following the Westphalia Treaty of 1648, we see that this role of giving protection to the individual has undergone waves of changes. At least three waves can be identified in this change of protection system given by the state to the individuals over the years from the Westphalian Treaty days. As the nation state was being created, the security system was mostly what was called the military security. That is, broadly, essentially, a protection of the physical protection of the individual against aggression by outside elements. In such a setup, actually, the states used to define their areas of interest and accordingly offer protection to their individuals. There was no ground for dissatisfaction, or there was no logic formulated to express any dissatisfaction, because the activity was confined to the states only. The individual hardly had any role. But over the years again, late 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, it was seen that it was not enough that only physical military security should be given to the individuals. What was demanded is that there should be, for instance, work available to these people, their livelihood system should be made secure, and this way the demands of the people, which was expressed in terms of popular struggles, that led to establishment and formulation of what are called the civil and political rights regimes. So, for instance, it is now any individual now is secure against dictatorships. Any individual is now secure against torture, physical torture, mental torture. These securities are built-in securities, which is the bounden duty of the state to make available to the individuals, and they are definitely not physical or they are not militarily defined. Now, these economic and social needs of the individuals provided another big cordon of security to the individuals. This was from the military security. Now the state has started providing the material security. Of late, more particularly, with the coming of human rights on the global arena, with the struggles for human rights occupying the center stage in the advance of the humanity. We have, besides civil and political rights, other rights being made available to the struggling people, and these are also known as social, economic and cultural rights. So today we have a system of security, three levels: the cordon of security available to the individuals in the state, a cordon of security which is by definition non-military. That doesn't mean that the military security has disappeared, but what has happened is the military along with the military security, the material security has also been provided to the individuals, and the material security comes in the package of livelihood subsistence forms. So we have the governments with obligations to make sure that these rights are available to the individuals. Actually, an individual in his or her lifetime looks for three things primarily. Of course, security is an important one, but I would consider more important than the security, or maybe because the security is already sort of laid in the living system, maybe more than security, we are looking for dignity of the individual. And a third important dimension of that individual persona is what is called identity. So we have dignity, security and identity as three basic standards which must be made available to individuals, and this responsibility belongs to the state. That is how in the later days, that is of current days, contemporary phase, we have another system of security superseding the previous two. Previous two were, as I said, military security and material security. And these days we have moral security, which have to be also ensured by provision of such facilities and institutionalization of such systems by the state, so that individuals also are allowed to lead a morally dignified life. Now, all these considerations, all these developments have led to a different type of repercussion in the interstate or international relations. Actually, we are discussing today about that dimension of what is happening to this security syndrome or concept, or you like call, in the global politics today. When I say that there are alternative security systems available, it obviously means that military build-up, which was confined to mean security for a pretty long period of time, is not the only security belt available to the individual, to the states. Because we are now discussing about the interstate relationship and the role of security, or interstate relationship and the alternative forms of security that are now emerging in the global scene. But as you know, the global scene has always been characterized by a particular asymmetry, inequality. That is, there is always a very senior power, political power, a very powerful country, to put it simply, which tries to maintain a balance of power, meaning thereby which tries to maintain a particular status quo among the global partners, so that its position as a preeminent or a hegemon or a dominant power is not disturbed. Therefore, this balance of power concept has a very particular ideological origin. It is precisely maintained. It has been also ideologically enunciated, or ideologically it has been propounded, that balance of power means existing power relationship should not be disturbed, existing status quo should not be disturbed. Now, against this particular concept, which premised itself on the military build-up, provision of geostrategy and formulation of geostrategy and backing up by the military build-up. Now, when we look at this particular dimension of security formulation by the by the states in the world, we see now that there is also a change there taking place, especially after this destabilization of the world after the Cold War. Cold War, as we know, was characterized by rivalry among two camps of nations, the capitalist and the communist countries. And end of Cold War saw eclipse of the communist countries. Soviet Union has been dissolved. That made USA the lone superpower. Many would say that if these two countries, Soviet Union and former Soviet Union and USA, were competing for the number one spot in the world, then after the disappearance of Soviet Union, why is USA investing so much of money and attention to military build-up? Where is the need? Since the main enemy, what is to call the axis of evil, what President Reagan called axis of evil, when that axis of evil disappeared out of the scene, the question of America trying to make 21st century its own century. Why should it make it? Why should it try to spend so much of money in defense defense postures? Actually, this is a situation where we have to look into what are those ambitions which fire the American presidency to become number one in the world, not only number one in the world, to have that final control and say in matters of, what they call preempting any source of dissension against it, any source of challenge to its dominance. So the doctrine of preemption precisely meant that if there is any danger suspected in any country in the world, whether it is Afghanistan, Sudan, Libya, whatever, Iraq, and maybe in future Iran or whatever country, if there is any source of challenge against its preeminence, then USA retains the right to destroy those sources of challenge wherever they are in the world. So in a manner of speaking, the two-party rivalry, which was the highlight of the Cold War, has been replaced, as Professor Noam Chomsky has called, by a superhero strategy, a super villainy strategy. That is, the USA is building itself into such a huge military power that others are very distant seconds and thirds, and others simply shiver, and they can't be considered on equal footing with the first. So the superhero has amassed so much of strength and villainy that others simply have to follow it. There is no question of claiming equality with it. Now, it is in this context that we will actually outline our discussion of alternate security scenarios that we are seeing. I will basically be focusing on two aspects of it, namely how this prevailing or the continuing geostrategy and military build-up is taking a new direction thanks to the new formulations, new enunciations by the American presidency as late as 2005 and 2006, they are taking a new shape, new direction, a new contour is emerging in that. Yeah, it's no more the same thing. As for instance, we can begin with a quotation from the Undersecretary of Defense Policy, Douglas Feith. Now, he has summed it up this way. I quote him, during the Cold War, we had a strong sense that we knew where the major risks and fights were going to be. So, we could deploy people right there. That was the position during Cold War. But, now I am quoting again, but we are operating now in completely different concept, from combat to peacekeeping, anywhere in the world pretty quickly. Now, these are the two central planks in this new strategy of military build-up that is evolving in America. Now, these two are, as I said, anywhere in the world. It need not be in America only. The threat need not be inside the nation. The threat can be anywhere in the world, and at the same time, it should have the capacity to overcome it pretty quickly. So you don't give much time left, because it has to be done over a distance. Therefore, its earlier policies have also changed. And for instance, the deployment of military bases has become very flexible. 35% of the Cold War bases have been, 35% of the military bases, US military bases installed during the Cold War days have been closed down. And flexible strategies have now been formulated and made operational. Now, what are they? For instance, what they call lily pads, LILY, lily pads, that is forward operating sites, skeletal sites with minimal or no American military presence, but maintained either by contractors or by the cooperative security of the host nation personnel. So the host nation personnel will be able to maintain these flexible sites. So what they call the quick response style and overkill strategy. Now, as you know, to make this possible, other strategies have also come in. The global war on terror following 9/11 September attack has turned out to be a very convenient recruitment strategy of such host nations which offer the cooperative security. For example, India has already provided port facilities for the US forces engaged in the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq, after, of course, following or rather fearing a popular popular anger after the government of India, NDA regime at that time, denied a role in the occupation of Iraq. Influential analysts like Ashley Tellis and MacDonald would like to assign low-end operations to the Indian forces in this global misadventure of Americans. Many detailed and a very good succinct detailed analysis of this aspect of US foreign policy, through which one can say the US is trying to raise India as a great power. I am not going to the details of this at this stage. I would recommend you to study a journal called Aspect of India's Economy. Let me repeat, Aspect of India's Economy, issue number 41, December 2005. And this report was prepared by a Mumbai-based team called Research Unit for Political Economy. Now they have done a very important research and come with some of these findings. Now, having said this, let me come to the official pronouncements made very recently in respect of this particular strategy that is in the making. The strategy is, as I said, of making globe its theater of operation. No more USA as a nation, USA making the territorial boundary of USA as its theater of war, but making globe its theater of war. Now, such a strategy, unfortunately, has been also aided and abetted by some of those highly provoked ideological game plans. As we come to now know from the declassified documents that Iraq, not only it was not only known that Iraq never had weapons of mass destruction. More importantly, what was aimed at Iraq was to fix the facts in Iraq. That is, what the US-led forces would do to Iraq should be justified, and accordingly the facts of Iraq should be drawn up. And in other words, fix the facts in Iraq as was told to a policy subcommittee, that you don't have to go for justification of what has happened in Iraq. First fix the facts in Iraq, and then the policies would automatically be justified. Another incident, another important proclamation or another important expression of this US strategy comes from none other than Ms. Condoleezza Rice's famous article in Washington Post called Promise of Democratic Peace, and it was quickly followed by Nicholas Burns' address at the European Institute. And these two major pieces have laid down the benchmarks of the future US strategy, which is an alternative security scenario presented to the world because of the US efforts. Now here I should begin telling you that, as it happened during the Harry Truman days, Dean Acheson said that I was present at that moment of history. Now, when you are saying I was present at that moment of history, what he was referring to is that he was witnessing a remaking of the global history after the World War II, for which USA provided the financial and the political leadership. Now, this question of I was present was again revived by Condoleezza Rice in this famous article of Promise of Democratic Peace, which officially now we can take it as an official expression, which assumes that USA and its transatlantic ally, that is European Union, only constitute the quorum of the democratic legitimacy. So their democracy is beyond doubt. What is important, the article, they argued, both the Secretary of State and the Under Secretary of State have argued, what is important is now together USA and the European Union must make sure that the world is made safe from terrorism, especially from the third world countries, which are indulging in all types of their native rhetorics. For instance, native rhetorics meaning thereby that the slogans of cultural determinism like Asian values, Latino culture, Slavic despotism, etc., they don't make any sense, Condoleezza Rice has argued. These are breeding grounds of democratic deficits, or what she calls freedom deficits. So once you go for this type of missions, that Asians have Asian values or Latino have their own culture to feel proud about, then you are also creating a situation in the global scene whereby terrorism breeds easily. Why terrorism breeds easily? Because in such a scenario, freedom deficit becomes rampant. So, Condoleezza Rice would argue they deserve, for them, sovereignty is a luxury. For these third world countries pursuing these type of missions, sovereignty, state sovereignty is a luxury. The so-called equality among states is a myth, and therefore it becomes the bounden obligation of these two superpowers, of these two allies, that is US and the European Union, to swamp out all those who are cultivating their culturally peculiar missions, nation state specific missions. In that famous article again, Condoleezza Rice referred to Russia, but she doesn't refer to China and India as suffering from freedom deficits. Now, point is that possible? Just because Condoleezza Rice has identified these third world countries as lacking freedom, is that all necessary to ride roughshod over them, or can it do it? Now here, therefore, we have to stop for a while to think about what exactly is in mind of these imperial foreign policy pursuits. Prudence actually demands not to downplay the role of this superpower. Is a superpower, is a superhero rather. Formerly it was a superpower because there was also a rival, but in the form of a former Soviet Union. But now it is all alone playing a superhero role, which the USA, of course, has arrogated to itself in the post-Cold War period. Actually at stake is in this scenario, in this type of military adventurism that we are witnessing from Washington. Actually, what is true about this is that there is an ever weakening economic base of USA, and if the economic base is, as we all know, is the real sustainer, provides the real strength for maintenance of dominance in the world. Mere technological military heroism never counts so much for maintaining dominance in the world. At the root of military and technological dominance lies an economic base, a strong economic base. Unfortunately, over the years, American economy is undergoing decline. But then it also follows at the same time that if the American economy is undergoing decline, and if other countries are responsible for this decline or involved in the process of decline of the American economic base, then American presence, logically it follows, should be there in other countries also, in order that this eventuality of their overtaking American economy doesn't occur. Therefore, many people argue that this American this alternative security strategy, which has taken America from a bipartisan world Cold War rivalry to a monolithic superhero dominating the entire world, has been caused because of this many countries' involvement in the American economy, which is at the same time on the decline. It is important to observe that whereas American military expenditures are half of world's military spending, it is also at the same time the world's largest debtor nation today. Probably before 80s or before globalization days, more particularly, America was the most creditor nation. And today it is the worst debtor nation. It owes debts to almost all countries. And the lifeline to such an economy has come from the fact that, and being a debtor nation, it is a very growing economy, as they say. Now this has become possible because 70% of the world's savings have been sunk in this economy for many reasons, including attraction of the dollar market for exports of the third world countries. Other indicators are also quite alarming, economic indicators, but they are not really so much publicized. Some of these indicators are as follows. US share of world income has fallen from 50% in 1950 to 21% today. Its share of manufacturing has fallen from 60% in 1950 to 25% in 1999. Its share of world stock of FDIs, foreign direct investment, have fallen from 47% in 1960 to 21% in 2001. Now these are three mega indicators which clearly show that the American economic base is on decline, it is weakening. Now, if this economic giant is really weakening from inside, then how can it survive? The only way, as the new military strategists have propounded, is to make American military presence all over the globe, because so that such an eventuality is not allowed to occur at all. But what either Condoleezza Rice or Nicholas Burns or Douglas Feith are propounding, it will be too much to say that it will have a very smooth sailing just because it comes from the world's biggest hegemon. It is actually riddled with so many other difficulties which probably such a strategy, such an alternative strategy of security hasn't been able to take into account. Three directions can be identified for that purpose. It hopes quite a bit, it pins its hope rather, number one, to persuade Europe to join America's insistence on regime change in the former communist countries, the CIS countries, which gave major headache to the US in 2005. Now, will the European Union accept this? When we have the records of 2005, US role in the CIS countries, the Tulip Revolution not only ran out of control, it signaled a red alert all over the CIS countries. And look at this data. Uzbekistan shut down the US military bases. Azerbaijan decided not to allow US troops. Kyrgyzstan is now charging market rent for, is deciding to charge market rent for the US military basis. So in such an inhospitable military and economic conditions in the countries of CIS, I think it is not easy that European Union will be persuaded to join America in carrying the business of regime change which US has been doing. I mean there. The second direction I would suggest is, now as we know, Russia has become the president of the rotatory president of the G8 industrial group 8 industrial group. Now a situation has come where Russia's profile as an energy supplier is not only growing, probably for the first time it also is sending signals that America is no longer in the total control of the energy supply, oil supply. Now that is a very dangerous situation. Once you come to know that the oil reserves are beyond your control, then there is a problem. And much so with Russia becoming rotatory though, president of the Group 8 countries, and Russia will obviously utilize its presidency to promote its alliances with European Union countries. The third one in this scenario of difficulty it is likely to encounter this. The compulsions of exit strategy that USA is now facing, almost like Vietnam type in Iraq and in Iran nuclear issue also. We have countries like Russia and China differing from the other 3 permanent members of the UN Security Council, and all those definitely draw the limits of USA dominance or USA hegemony in the world politics. How do you see this scenario, this alternative security scenario that is emerging on the global upper layers? How do we respond to this with us in our home? That's also very interesting. Now, 3 trends again can be identified, and they all indicate that America's control, which used to be through indirect remote control system, that is Australia and Japan operating them on America's behalf. Now that alternative control system is now being substituted by very steady, firmly installed alternative institutional arrangements. The recently formed East Asian Summit of 16 populous countries represented an interesting global trend, which a remote control through APEC, earlier which linked East Asia to USA in the wake of Cold War, has now become avoidable. Now we have these autonomous institutional arrangements coming up premised on pan-Asian regionalism. For instance, if you look at the figures, India's trading with developing Asian countries during this last decade has gone up from 11.8% of its total trade in 1990 to 24% in 2000. China has displaced USA as its most important trading partner. In other words, intra-Asian trade has risen up, and sort of an autonomous strength is building. Secondly, Asian energy scene has dramatically changed with the discovery of location of hydrocarbons in the continent. Now that is becoming a source of strength for Asian unity. And thirdly, unilateral imposition of one's own perception of war and terrorism has also brought the 3 Asian giants, China, Russia and India, together into Shanghai Cooperation Organization, along with Iran, Pakistan and the Central Asian countries. Joint military exercises have been conducted. Japan and South Korea need to be brought into this orbit before a meaningful pressure can be generated to ask US-led coalition forces to leave the area. Something that is happening in the CIS countries, for instance. Now, the central point, there's so many things to be done. For instance, this Pan-Asianism doesn't blossom on its own. We need to have our own Asian financial institutions along with an Asian free trade area, which is of course under making now. Now, creation of Pan-Asian pipeline grid, for instance. All these things are important, but they are important, they need to be done, and more at the same time, what is necessary for the Asian political leaders is to change their mindset. Namely, it is no more the question of viewing the security from the balance of power perspective. The balance of power angle has been always how not to disturb the existing hierarchy, existing asymmetry, existing inequality in the international relations. So, India should not, one would argue, join this concept of maintaining the balance of power, because that is what Condoleezza Rice and others are trying to advance, saying that balance of power in the interest of freedom and for making world safe for terrorism has to be maintained. But what we should not forget, or what we should not miss from seeing in such a stand, is that would also mean allowing the existing inequalities to flower, with America remaining at the top, and it is only what is called it's just a rhetorics that it is promoting the India as a great power. Now, there are so many aspects to alternative security scenario, but I have only taken this time to discuss about the changes that are taking place in the military build-up, geostrategic thrusts in the foreign policy formulations of the most dominant power following the Cold War period. But there are so many other areas where this alternative security scenario analysis can be applied. For instance, this environmental security is one, human security is another, energy security can be still another. So there are so many ways. Security is no more confined to military build-up or even geostrategic locations, though today's discussion we try to confine to what new changes that have come up even in this military build-up geostrategic locations directions analysis. Thank you very much.